welcome to our Corporate Governance and Board Leadership interview series. My name is Chioma Mordi, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Society for Corporate Governance. I'd like to start by an introduction. May we meet you?
Okay, my name is Adetunji Oyebanji. I'm the MD CEO of Double One PLC, which used to be Mobil Nigeria PLC. I've been in this role for over 10 years. I've also been very active in industry-wide associations. I'm the immediate past chairman of the Major Energies Marketers Association of Nigeria. I'm also involved in a lot of other things in the industry.
Given your vast knowledge and expertise within the business environment and the ecosystem, in the context of responsible business practice, how would you balance profitability with social, environmental, and governance consideration in companies' business strategy?
I've always had the belief that if your business has a short-term focus, then all you will ever think about is just making as much profit as you can, because you are never sure that the business is going to be around in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. But when you are operating in a company like ours, which has existed in Nigeria for well over 100 years, long-term sustainability is very key to all the considerations that you have. So in decision-making, in board discussions, it's really about having a company that will be sustainable and will stand the test of time. And therefore, the areas of environment, making sure you're taking care of the environment, the various stakeholders that you're dealing with, whether your community relations and how you interact with the communities in which you operate and all the various public entities you interact with, and then your response to government regulations, whether it's on safety and all that. All those things you have to take together in order to end up with a sustainable company that will stand the test of time. So for me, that's really what underpins all the decisions that we make within the organization.
That is quite commendable, because the issue of sustainability sometimes should outpower or outrace profitability eventually. And being that this organization has been in existence for over 100 years, I'm sure that other factors aside profitability is being considered. To what extent would you say regulators in this sector have, or any implementing stronger measures, policies, or law in ensuring an improved due diligence in terms of the processes and ensuring transparency and accountability?
The primary law that regulates the upstream, downstream, midstream, the entire oil and gas industry is the Petroleum Industry Act, which was passed about 2 years ago now. That law came after deliberations that took place over 20 years. It was very difficult to get it to transmit from being a bill to becoming an act of parliament. But it's finally in place. While nobody will say it's 100% perfect, it is indeed a very, very comprehensive law that seeks to tackle all aspects of the industry, whether upstream, downstream, or midstream. And that forms the basis of the regulation of the industry. And as you know, our industry is a very volatile, we deal with very volatile products, whether it's crude, whether it's refined products, where we deal with products that have very significant impact on the environment, whether it's because of fires or because of oil spills and things like that. Therefore, regulations are very key to us. So I would say that the PIA provides a very comprehensive framework for us to operate within the industry. Like all laws, the implementation is key. The NMDPRA, which is the regulator for our downstream side has done a very good job in terms of actualizing the aspects that deal with the downstream. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I would say, yes, that law certainly gives a very clear framework for operations within the industry.
Thank you so much for pretty much sharing the regulatory framework of the industry and the enabling acts guiding the processes and the procedure of this industry. This interview is around corporate governance and board leadership, like I said. Are there any specific governance policies, regulation that also covers this?
This has been a debate that we have had. When you look at the banking sector, where you have the CBN, you have the Nigerian Communications Commission for the telecommunications. Many of those regulators and the laws that set up those regulators actually make give specific guidelines in terms of, tenures of directors, the MDs, how long, the chairman, how long they can operate. I think as far as banks are concerned, it even prescribes, the diversity of the board and things like that. Interestingly enough, the PIA has been rather limited in this area. Again, maybe because of the products we deal with, emphasis has been more on the operational side of things. And I am of the opinion that in future reviews of the PIA, we need to begin to look at the governance structure within, the operators. I think one of the things, of course, that has led to this situation also, apart from the nature of the products we deal with, is the fact that the operators in our industry cover a very wide spectrum. So you have somebody who is just a single petrol station owner, that is all he owns and operates. So for all intents and purposes is what you will call a small or medium-sized enterprise. That you go all the way from that to major multinational companies that operate not only in Nigeria, but in several countries around the world. So again, when you are prescribing governance standards, do you make them governance standards that will be applicable to those multinationals and at the same time be applicable to just this small man who is maybe selling only lubricants in his small shop? So I think with time, they will have to define, maybe have codes and say, look, this will be applicable to people at this level. And I'll tell you why it's important, because in terms of, the general perception of the public, oil marketers, oil companies, maybe simply because of the fact that a lot of people do not know about the workings within that industry. There's always a lot of speculation. And I think if you had stronger governance in that regard, what you would find is that you would have a lot of very responsible boards, that would then be able to make decisions that would protect the society and protect the environment and protect the interests of shareholders. When people on the boards now become more conscious about their responsibility in terms of making decisions, because if you are dealing with very harmful products, decisions you make around the board on how those products are handled, how they are stored, how they are transported, becomes very critical. So a board will then have to make a decision to say, look, we're a big operator. We cannot afford to be transporting our goods with substandard trucks, because that has a potential impact on the society if that truck gets an accident and causes a fire and all that. So, when you have greater regulatory oversight on what those boards do, you will find that maybe the quality of decisions they will make will be better. Unlike a situation where many companies now are just single-man entities and so on and so forth. So I think it's something very important. I would say the PIA has not really done much in terms of making such specifications.
Thank you for the advocate for governance discussion, governance framework to be considered and captured in the existing act or the bill that covers your sector. Are there any other regulatory body that covers them, say like the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, or those that are listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange? Are they covered by those stipulated laws?
Any company that is registered, is subject to the guidelines of CAMA to start with. So that is definitely already in place. And then for those in our industry that are quoted on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, today they are quite limited again. Also, our company is no longer listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And a few other people have also delisted from the stock exchange. But for those who remain listed, of course, they will be subject to, the codes and guidelines that exist for companies that are so listed. And of course, the FRCN is also provides oversight again for companies that are of a particular size. You must file your returns to that entity. I remember an instance where, one of the institutions had a single person occupying the seat of both chairman and managing director. I know that the FRCN took up that institution and made it a point to ensure that the company separated the two positions. So, yes, I think, for those, I would call them more general regulators. Definitely, they do have an impact on the operations of the larger companies. It's just that the entity that is specifically in charge of regulating the downstream is the one that unfortunately doesn't have much in that regard. Yes,
absolutely. You spoke about some of these organizations that have delisted from the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Would you attribute that action to compliance of the requirements, or is it just the environment, the business environment?
Each company obviously has its own reasons, and I think it's a question of pros and cons. I'm sure each company will look at what advantages. Of course, going to the capital market, being quoted on the stock exchange, the primary reason is that it enables you to raise finance, relatively cheaper than, bank loans. But the other thing is that sometimes the requirements also can be quite onerous. And given that our main industry regulator is not emphasizing some of those things, and the emphasis in our industry, like I've always said, is really on safety more than operational activities. So how do you store product? How do you transport product? All your handling methods. So a lot of emphasis seems to be more on those areas. Now, when you're looking at CAMA, you're looking at the stock exchange and all those other entities. They are hardly talking about anything to do with operation. So I think people tend to feel that the greater weight by way of regulation is coming from operational and things like that. Unlike banks that it's more about financial transactions and things like that. And therefore, the stock exchange and whatever is very concerned about the government's practices, within those entities. So I can't say ultimately what drives every single person, but I think sometimes it's more of the fact that they place more emphasis on safety and operational considerations more than anything else, and maybe the value. For instance, today the banks are being called to raise additional capital, even because their own regulator is making that demand of them. Nobody is making such a demand for oil companies. So, the need for them to go to the market and all that is limited.
I think for me, a lot of pointers and a lot of key factors that you've mentioned around the element of risk. Risk management is a governance issue, as it were, and we expect that the board should have an oversight around that, in as much as they are not basically around financial risk, but they are also human risk, reputational risk, and because it could be even cost of life. So I feel that, like you have said, there should be an advocacy for the governance aspect, with regards to the current bill that governs the sector, so that oversight function of the board with regards to risk, with regards to sustainability, ESG, how is your product even developed, as it were, what is the harmful increment and all that that is used for it. I think that it's something that we should advocate for, pretty much for the primary regulator. I also see that, and you had mentioned that 11 PLC, formerly Mobil, was on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and you are also versed with corporate governance in as much by association and by your affiliation with a lot of this organization. But what really is corporate governance to you, and how important is corporate governance to the larger society of this country?
It's an interesting question, because for me, I like to simplify what corporate governance is. Sometimes there's a tendency that we use a lot of big words, and the common man on the streets doesn't really understand. He just comes out and says, "You people are speaking a lot of grammar and whatever." But really, it's about that word of that I like using a lot, sustainability. It's about doing the right things within an organization, such that all the various people who interact with that organization, I'm talking about staff, I'm talking about the owners of the company, the customers of the company, the government, the community, all these various stakeholders, that we are doing right by them. So we're enabling the owners to generate profit, so that whenever they have invested their money, they can get their fair returns. We're making sure we're taking care of the community where we operate, not to replace government in its role, but at least reaching out to make sure that we firstly minimize our impact. So our operations should be such that we are not polluting the ground, we are not putting dirty water into the gutters. We are impacting people in that particular way. It also involves paying our taxes to government, making sure that whatever we legitimately owe to the government by way of taxes, we are paying them as and when due. So for me, corporate governance is about all these kind of things. And my feeling is that at the end of the day, if we are doing them well, based on a very well-organized board structure that has the knowledge and is empathic about all these points I've raised,
Yeah.
we will have a sustainable organization that will be of benefit not only to the owners, but all that work in the organization, all the contractors that interact with the company, the public, government, and all these various stakeholders. So it's about operating a company in such a way that we can maximize and optimize, the benefits to all the various stakeholders that have interactions with the company. That's my own simple way of looking at it.
Quite simple and straight to the point, without a lot of corporate jargon,
Exactly.
as we call it.
Yeah.
So thank you for giving us that understanding of corporate governance in a layman perspective. But I will say you have, in your explanation, your definition of corporate governance, you mentioned a lot of stakeholders across the value chain. You mentioned the employees, the government, you mentioned also the suppliers. These are all stakeholders across various value chain. Who exactly do you think should be the driver of corporate governance to ensure that sustainable growth and sustainability that you spoke about?
Responsibility lies with the promoters of a company. Promoters are essentially the shareholders of the company. And why do I say the buck stops with them? It is their duty to appoint the directors of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts from them saying, look, if our interest is for a sustainable company where ESG and such like issues are paramount in our thinking, then we should appoint a board that will help us drive those ideals. So once they do that, and they now give the responsibility to the board then has a duty to drive all those ideals on a day-to-day basis or on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. And the board, by definition, now transfers that responsibility to the management of the company. Yeah. But in terms of the pyramid, it probably starts with the shareholders electing a board of directors and saying, these are ideals. If you know, in the Western world today, there's a lot of what we call shareholder activism.
Yes.
And a lot of that is driven because the shareholders want boards that are responsive to environmental issues. They are driving people to get out of fossil fuels. They're driving people in certain directions. So yes, that kind of shareholder activity in the Western world is driving, the nature of the boards that are being set up. It is driving the agendas of, those boards and those companies in terms of what they can invest in or they shouldn't invest in. In some cases, they are forcing people out of boards because they believe they are not sufficiently focused on these issues. So for me, it's the owners determine who gets on the board. The board runs with those ideals. The board transfers it to the management. So that way it percolates throughout the entire system of the company. And that keeps it moving in the direction that you want it to go. But if you have shareholders who are not interested in those ideals, then you can very easily end up with a board that, doesn't put any priority on those issues.
You had mentioned strongly, severally about a key element of corporate governance and what we see in terms of the trends of corporate governance, and it's ESG that speaks to the environmental and social and the governance aspect, of corporate governance. I'll come to that, but first, I would like us to also touch a bit about a current trend that we have seen around diversity and inclusion with the current corporate governance trend. What's your take on diversity on the board of an organization in promoting corporate governance? Are there any effects or advantages or disadvantages as the case may be?
I think diversity is a very positive thing in terms of the benefits that it brings to a board and its operations. Having a diverse board, and when I talk about diversity now, I'm not only thinking about gender diversity, it may be diversity in case of age, it may be diversity in terms of where people are from, their backgrounds, whether it's their educational background. If you have a good mix of people, it's true that it's important that if you have an engineering company, you should have engineers on the board of the company so that they know what they're talking about. But it also is sensible to have people who are also non-engineers so that they can bring, different perspectives. There's a local saying that we cannot all sleep with our heads in the same direction. At the end of the day, if you have diversity, then you bring different perspectives, different views, different values to the table. And I think that will help to improve the overall decision-making process, the quality of decisions that, such a board makes. I know you may also want to talk about gender diversity. It's a popular subject. Interestingly, today, Double One PLC doesn't have any females on the board, but it is simply from the perspective that whenever we have a vacancy, we set about to get the best person we can get who will add value at the time, whether the person happens to be a man or a woman. So for several periods during the course of the life of this company, which has been, like I said, over 100 years, we've had women. In fact, way before a lot of companies even considered having women on boards, we had women. Up to maybe a few years ago, we had Mrs. Adetiba as a key member of our board. Our boards have never been big. I think at that time we had only 6 people on our board. So she was on the board for about 8 years. So the fact that we don't have a lady today doesn't. I have my own views. I am not too sure I agree with you must have. I always prefer, in consider the best people available, and if several of them happen to be women, all well and good. Because when you have a prescribed number, what you then do is that if you now have an opportunity to have more females on the board, you say, well, I've ticked the box, I've got the 2 that I don't need. So to me, I would rather say, because I believe, the women who are probably even more capable and knowledgeable than men. So it's the organization that we lose it if there's an opportunity to get some person like that on board. Whenever we have board opportunities and we interview people, we are not necessarily saying it must be a man that we interview both men and women. And if it happens to be a woman that is the best candidate at the time, then that is who we will take. So that's my own perspective on this
gender
diversity.
Yes. Thank you for that perspective. Like I said, 2 key corporate governance trends that we have seen in the recent past is around diversity and ESG. So I'll go back to ESG, which I feel that given the kind of industry that you play, is an important element. And you have also spoke about the operations of, the organization. In recent time, also at the last, I think COP28, there's this international push or advocacy for carbon footprint emission, how we can save the earth, that provides so much resources to man. What is your take around the carbon footprint? Is there any strategy in place, most especially for 11 PLC, that you would like to share?
Some of the steps we have taken, for instance, include the fact that in this facility, where we consume a lot of power in terms of our office building, our storage tanks, our manufacturing plants, our loading facilities, we use a lot of energy and power. And in the recent past, all that have been powered largely by diesel generators. But because of the drive and trend towards renewables, what we did was we made a conscious effort. So about 3 years ago, we started investing in gas-fired generators. And I'm pleased to tell you today that this facility is powered purely by natural gas. So we've tried to move away from, fuels that are, I would say, more polluting, like diesel, to cleaner energy that will help the environment. Another thing we have done, as you can see, most of the products of petrol that is moved around Nigeria, whether it's petrol or diesel or whatever, is taken by these big trucks. And the vast majority of them are driven by diesel also. But again, we have made a conscious effort to invest in trucks that are powered by compressed natural gas. So again, that has gone a long way to reducing our carbon footprint, because these are cleaner forms of energy. Currently, we're investigating wider use of solar power in our retail outlets. So we're currently undergoing a study. And once that is completed, we'll be able to transfer a lot of the operations from using electric to converting to solar power. So these are some of the things we have done. We continue to look for, opportunities to improve in this area, because we believe it's all about sustainability, not only of the company, but of the environment and of the earth. And I think the more that we can do that, in terms of what we sell now as products, up to about 6 years ago, we were not a significant player in gas. But today, we have invested in 2 very large LPG tanks. So we are one of the major players in LPG in Nigeria. Also, in about 50 of our retail outlets across Nigeria, we now sell LPG to customers. So again, we've helped move a lot of people away from using firewood and so on and so forth to using this cleaner form of energy in terms of LPG. And we plan to expand that to more of our retail sites nationwide. So those are a few of the things we've been doing to, move away from what you might call dirty fuels to cleaner energy sources.
I actually wanted to, at the back of mind, touch on how are you now extending this projects, to the external environment? Is there a CSR project advocating for, the use of renewable power or energy, and also the clean fuel? Is there anything in place?
No, we haven't done much of that. When we talk about CSR here, what we've chosen certain areas like education, like health, like community development programs. Those have been the areas we have, simply because it's driven more by what the requirements of our communities are. The people that surround our operations, have indicated a preference for projects in these areas. So that's why we have tended to support them. But, we continue to be open to anything. If, for instance, they talked about maybe putting a solar facility or something.
Yeah.
It's something we could consider, but as at now, most requests for intervention, that we get are, mostly in the area of health or education and things like that.
So moving along, I think in February this year, there was a directive by the federal government and the Minister of Petroleum Resources around local content. What's your take on the implementation of it? And what are the benefits that you see?
Well, okay. I think the people where there's more immediate impact on that is more really on the upstream, because the size of the contracts that they award there, the big engineering projects are largely dominated by import-based activities. And I think in driving the local content, what they call the local content law and whatever, government has been doing as much as it can to encourage that local contractors participate more in those activities. In our own case, I would say almost 100% of our work is done by local contractors to start with in the downstream state.
Yes.
Because these are not as complex as, building a rig or platform or things like that. So I think the only area where I would say we depend on foreign expertise has to do with machinery and equipment that we bring in from outside the country. So sometimes, and very rarely, if we want to install a new filling line, for instance, it's something we'll have to import. And sometimes, the manufacturer would then send people to come and install the equipment and so on and so forth. But every other activity that we do here, whether it's moving our product, whether it's building new stations, whether it's building new tanks, we use local content. So for us in the downstream, it's not as much of a problem. It's more of a concern in the upstream, where they want to, get more local involvement in the value chain.
Yeah. I have, heard pretty much in my engagement with different sectors. Sometimes the players around maybe the financial sector or the pension sector feel that the regulation can be overbearing, or there are too much regulations within their sectors, right? Where you have the CBN for the banking and financial sector, then you have the FRCN, then you have the tax and all that. Do you feel that this sector is highly regulated?
To me, the challenge that many of the sectors have is not so much that the sectors are being over-regulated. Sometimes it is how the regulations are carried out. The lack of clarity, the fact that there's a lot of discretionary power. Somebody can say they don't like what you are doing and just come in and lock your gate and stop your operations. And when you find out what is the reason behind it, it's not always a desire to ensure the regulations are being kept. Sometimes the objectives are completely different. When you have people coming and saying, well, you didn't take care of us properly, and therefore we are going to enforce this law more than we would have. So I think that is more of in our industry, we need to have regulation. We have
more
to
regulation.
Yes, we need to be regulated because we deal with highly volatile products. Every time, you pick up the newspaper or you're watching television, you hear that a truck rolled over, petrol, 50 cars got burnt or whatever. So regulation is required in our industry. We can't shy away from it, especially on the operational side of things. So I wouldn't advocate that they should suddenly make it free for all. In fact, one of the challenges we also have is what I might call the absence of a level playing field. So some people, the regulators apply a very strong, hard hammer, and some other causes that gives those people a competitive advantage. So you that are being regulated very tightly cannot compete as effectively as those people who don't have that kind of regulation. So for me, it's more about how does the regulator see their role? Is it to grow and develop the industry and give guidance, or is it to perform the role of a policeman? They need to get it right in terms of the balance. So, and that cuts across the spectrum of all regulators, whether it is the CBN, whether it is PENCOM, it is all those various. They have to understand what their role is, not that it's all about hammer, 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 hammer. And that is, that's why sometimes they give governance a bad rap, because of the way it is implemented. Governance in itself is not a bad thing. It is just that it needs to, be done with the interests of the industry and the interests of the whole economy at the same time. There has to be a balance. If we kill all the companies with over-regulation, then we don't know where we'll find the jobs to give people and so on and so forth.
Rounding up, I would just like to know where you sit on, and I think it's just a touch on a comment you made when we started about the FRCN visiting or inviting a player within the industry to pretty much explain the dual role of the chairman and the MD. What's your take on that aspect of governance, separation of power between the MD and the chairman, as we round up this discussion?
Well, it's an interesting question you ask, because when I was making that comment, I said a company in our industry.
You did so.
Incidentally, it was this company, and I was the person that was the person invited by FRCN.
Oh, wow.
And it was an interesting discussion I had with them at the time. This must have been about 7 or 8 years ago. When, if you go to the US, the code within the US, most of the Fortune 500 companies that are described as such in the, there's a magazine in the US called Fortune. So for the Fortune 500, which are really the top leading companies in America, I would say about 70% of them have one person, individual, in the role of chairman and managing director. So in their geography, it is not something that is disallowed, okay? So they have various companies and affiliates across the world, and they want to practice exactly what they practice in America, in those countries. So in many of those American companies that exist in different parts of the world, one person is the chairman and CEO of the company. But increasingly in many other geographies, in Western Europe, South Africa, and all that, people have come to the conclusion that it's better to separate the two positions and all that. Let me end by saying that when I was sitting in that situation, in that role, where I was occupying those two positions, the internal governance practices and the authorities that guided my actions were so strict. They were stricter than any of the corporate governance rules that existed in Nigeria. So much so people used to make a joking comment to say, what kind of a chairman is this? Because they thought that I had all power to do everything.
Absolutely.
Whereas the people who set it up and had given you those titles put so many safeguards and guidelines behind it. So at the end of the day, the power that people are worried about, certainly in my own case, did not exist because there are many things I couldn't do. I will give you one example. All the various functions, so treasurers, human resources, and whatever, had people functionally who they reported to outside Nigeria. So if I wanted them to do something, they would have to get the concurrence of that person who is sitting outside, who is like the human resources expert, for instance. So if that person doesn't agree, I cannot override that decision.
Despite your dual role as
Despite all
yes,
which people didn't see or didn't understand. So I was trying to explain that to the FRC and to say, look, this thing you are worried about doesn't really exist here. I know that is what you say is your law here and what you want to follow, but the people who were the majority shareholders in their own geography, it is not the rule. So, but at the end of the day, I was able to convince my people over there that, look, this is the law in Nigeria and we have to obey that law. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's, as we round up, I think that speaks to the code is not a one-size-fits-all. I think you have to tailor your code based on your environment, based on the culture, and your level of development in terms of business and in terms of pretty much the business environment.
Exactly.
So with that, I would like to say a very big thank you for your time and also sharing your perspective around your industry and also corporate governance on a larger platform. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.